Welcome to Mandy, the ABA and Aditi, the OT's podcast.
We are two women across two time zones, from two cultures, two allied health fields offering two very different perspectives.
Yet we have a common goal of breaking down barriers and creating breakthroughs to promote interprofessional collaboration. Well, hello everyone, OTs, ABAs, SLPs, RBTs, educators, students, and of course, collaborators. Welcome to our 8th episode where we shine the light metaphorically on challenging behaviour. This is often a stumbling block for all therapists, and it is inevitably the major issue that hinders progress for clients and evokes anxiety for everyone all around. So we thought we would jump into that topic today.
Yes, today we discussed a little boy that I worked with on the autism spectrum with aggressive behaviour in his repertoire, who was receiving intensive ABA and weekly OT sessions, and how we were going to share how we collaborated to develop a behaviour protocol that could be incorporated both into his ABA sessions and to his OT sessions to address his aggression. We discuss OT and ABA collaboration and how that worked, and prescribe a method for successful implementation of OT programming while addressing reduction of aggression. We have a handout to explain a protocol you can use to assist you, and how to respond to problem behaviour if you don't have an ABA that you're working with to assist you. It's called the light switch on and light switch off protocol, and that will be in our materials.
Oh, brilliant. I think it'll be in our resources too, and show notes, easily accessible. So I do like to start with a study, and one study found that as many as 22 of young children with autism exhibit aggressive behaviours. That's a lot. And in current diagnosis rates for children of 1 in 54, that basically means that approximately 5 to 6 million children in the US have aggression issues, in their behavioural repertoire. And if you add that with sort of that developmental disability population, the number becomes quite significant. So it obviously impacts on carers and teams, all therapists working with children, and does require an enormous collaborative effort, I should say, between professionals delivering these services. And it can be challenging for everyone involved, everyone. I know that when I've had a client with aggressive behaviours, I dread the sessions. So I'm really glad we're discussing this today, because I think we're all in the same boat.
Great. And this week's shout out goes to the Ask for Evidence campaign, an initiative of the charity organisation Sense About Science. It's an excellent resource to assist in how to ask for support of claims made about scientific backing of anything from a product being sold to government's claims about their use of scientific evidence in public policy. Their website includes lots of resources, including an evidence hunter pack designed for teenagers to help them develop the skills and confidence needed to critically assess claims they come across online and reduce the spread of false information. See our resources for links to both Sense About Science and their Ask for Evidence initiative.
Oh, I love that. Great resource. Thank you, Mandy. So let's talk about this case study. We'll call him Sam. Can you tell me a little bit about the presentation with Sam? How did you come to work with Sam's OT?
Yeah, sure. I first assessed Sam we will call him Sam, in 2018. And at that time, he presented as, I would say a highly distractible child with limited motivators and no functional language, but he wasn't displaying any aggression in my first 2 sessions of assessment with him, and his family weren't experiencing any aggression at home either. Sam was diagnosed with autism just after the age of 2, which was very early, and had access to a variety of interventions by the time he came to me without hardly any success, according to his mother's account. But he was experiencing really high rates of both gross motor and verbal self-stimulatory behaviours, which was, highly interruptive to my assessment. Unfortunately, due to family circumstances, he didn't access intensive ABA services until 2020. And by that time, he was 8. And when I saw him 2 years later, he had developed really high rates of aggression and dangerous behaviour, and he'd become really, really challenging to work with. And his mother was seeking, support to address these behaviours.
So did the mum seek you out or the OT?
Yeah, she had heard of other parents that were in my program, and she initially came to me for behavioural intervention, but later on asked if she would, could commence OT with him. And
right.
As you can imagine, after 6 months of working with him intensively and addressing his aggression, I was, really concerned about introducing another therapist that, especially a lot of his aggression involved throwing materials. So, which is what you use a lot of. So, yeah, and he was, needed shoe tying and all those sort of things. So I asked the mother whether she would allow me to engage with the OT and have her present in my sessions, assess him together using her assessments but my assistance, and then having looked at her behavioural knowledge, we worked together to develop a modified version of our behaviour plan that she could incorporate into her sessions, and then we did crossovers. So it was a really nice collaboration.
Yeah, and was she open to it when you asked her?
Very open to it, because she was working herself. She works both in pediatrics but also in autism. And she was working with a little boy that had similar behaviours and was literally dreading, those sessions. It was actually on the day that I called her when she had just left one of the sessions where she took a bit of a pounding and the mother was, obviously beside herself. She was like, I am on the verge of letting this client go because I just can't deal with the level of aggression that he has.
Oh, gosh, been there. I've cried many times.
Yes.
So generally speaking, what sounds like if sort of the aggression is not addressed early on, it can sort of like reinforce itself, right? And become a bigger issue? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, of course, everyone is different. Every child is different and every client is different. But in this particular situation, actually, he told me the other day that it was exactly 12 months. He has a incredible memory and he can remember every session that he's ever had with us. And he came along and said it's exactly 12 months today. I don't know if he used that word exactly, but he said it's 12 months today since I started at FIT. And I realised, to be honest, it feels like 5, but that much of the intervention, I would say that I don't have favourites, but he is right on top of my list in terms of awesome kids that I work with. And we literally fight over him in our clinic now as to who's going to work with him, whereas once upon a time I used to work with him 10 hours a week, and I used to have him last session on a Friday night, and I would, roll out the door with exhaustion and, a lot of the times extremely distressed. And I won't say that lasted for a long time because it was a few months really, but you could never relax with him just when you thought you were sort of building a rapport and, our data was showing really good improvement on aggression. You'd look away for a second and get a, timer thrown in the side of your head, which happened to me way too many times. But anyway, so yeah, I was, it's different with every child, but I think the reason that people had not succeeded with Sam previously is that they had assessed whether they'd sort of done that with any assessment tool or not, that he was attempting to get out of work. There was a couple of factors going on, but in the main, he was attempting to get attention and he just didn't know how to get that appropriately. So, yeah, that was, one of the things for him. It was very specific to Sam and it's not true for every child.
So did Mum help you to sort of try to figure out what Sam liked? Because, him being nonverbal, I figured it would be really hard for you to know what sort of reinforcers or sensory things he enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, she was at a loss because she had tried a lot of different interventions and been actively involved in the early days herself. Unfortunately, through the course of meeting her and then starting intervention, eventually she went through a family breakup. So, it was complicated by the fact that she had to go back to work full-time, etc. But she had, from age 2, been really involved in his intervention and attempting. She knew that, one of the problems was these high rates of self-stimulatory behaviour and not having anything to compete with that. And in my initial assessment with him in 2018, while we used lollies in...
Pause.
Oh, Yes, sorry, did I say lollies?
Yes. Just FYI, this is an interesting pause button. It has nothing to do with OT and ABA. This is a trans-international problem.
Yes.
Lollies are candies or suckers for the American audience out there. So,
yeah. I became... I was the clinic that I was based at in Indiana for a period of time. I managed to convert everybody to calling them lollies.
Lollies.
But I realised that, you guys, ice lollies are like icy poles. Is that right? Is that fair to say in America? Well,
no, they're actually popsicles. So.
Yes. Anyway, so candies. So what was problematic about the candies is that he would chew them and then spit them out, which is, everybody knows how just unpleasant that is, particularly if you're using coloured candies and then you get this unpleasant kind of coloured liquid all over your materials. So, this is part of the problem, is that he would take a lolly, he would chew it, and then he would spit it out. And it really was very interruptive to instruction, as you can imagine, but also wasn't really motivating to him. It's just something that he would take. So, this was a big part of our intervention. You can't teach effectively if you don't have something that's motivating to the child. And so very early on, we identified that this kid had an interest in Google Maps and in particular building. And he'd just never been taught to, to use anything like he could use an iPad a little bit, but he'd never been taught to use a Switch or any kind of gaming device. And so we had to target that. And literally we had it tied to the table because, he would throw that thing at your head if you just gave him half a second. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's not really funny because it's really unpleasant for everybody involved. And it's dangerous. We had to take him to another location. Very distressing to his mum, obviously, and dangerous to anyone in his vicinity. So I didn't mean to laugh there. It's just that I can laugh about it now because he's just, if you met him today, you would never believe that this kid had aggression in his repertoire only 12 months ago. So getting things that were motivating to him, and because he loved Google Maps and looking at finding buildings, and he became, through, as we started to instruct him and give him more language, we found that he was really interested in, underground train lines, and so we taught him, over time how to use Minecraft and how to build things, and that allowed us to engage with him, and he just developed this amazing interaction, and all of a sudden we had an ability to instruct him and compete with that aggression.
So his fine motor skills were really limited to pointing and swiping or sliding on an iPad?
I mean, he was pretty proficient at throwing, let me tell you that. But he'd had a lot of practice at that. Mm-hmm. But two major things that really got in the way of working with this little guy was, he literally couldn't even hold a point. And, his... I'm not telling you anything new here, anybody that's listening to this, about kids that, have their whole hand open and very weak fingers, and even, closing those three fingers and making a point was very difficult. So then, any sort of fine motor coordination where you're using any kind of gaming device requires, a lot of coordination. So we literally, I had to learn how to use Minecraft. I had to take Minecraft lessons in order to, teach this kid, and we just literally had to, teach each component of moving this device to fluency while it was also attached to his wrist so that he couldn't throw it. So his fine motor skills were completely deficient, and Aditi, you would be much better at describing to me, that complete lack of strength where the fingers are almost dangling off their hand, just very loose. And of course, because of this limited repertoire of play behaviour, and because his problem behaviour was so severe, first of all, everybody would do everything for him. Sure. So he wasn't getting any practice at, he was being fed, he was being dressed, anything to reduce, his rate of aggression. That was the first thing. And then second of all, nobody would dare give him anything that would, work on fine motor strength for fear of having, being hit by it. So it was this kind of double-edged sword.
So do you know if the OT had tried any sort of sensory strategies or aspects that were addressed?
Well, I guess because by the time she came along, we had, done our assessment of the problem behaviour. And, I think there's for the behaviour analysts there, they could kind of tune out for a little bit there. But like if we left him to his own devices, which sometimes we had to because our protocol, when he was engaging in aggression involved not leaving him alone, but, removing ourselves for safety for a start from the cubicle, he would, and even when he had access to items, he would never throw things when left on his own. So it's not like, you would walk away from the table and then he would pick up everything and throw it at the wall, so it may have been what we would call kind of automatically reinforcing to him. Those items were always directed at a person. So, straight away that tells you that it's a different, it's not self-stimulatory behaviour. His mother accounted to me, he never threw things when left to his own in his room.
What did he do when he was on his own?
Not much, to be honest. He was really, what he wanted to do was to be taken in the car a lot, and he had obsessions with shopping centres. So his mum spent a lot of time walking him through shopping centres. And then before he came to us, he was at daycare, and I never saw him there. He came to us, but I understood there was a lot of throwing of objects at other children and at his carers that, often resulted in him having to be sort of isolated. So,
wow, okay. So, Mandy, where does anyone start with a situation like this? I think I would be quite lost. Where do you begin?
Yeah, I guess you have to look at, what skill can you teach that, takes you to the next step to allow you to teach, functional skills. And one of the things this little boy couldn't do was sit and wait in the presence of a coach without engaging in aggression. So that's where we had to start. And, I teach something called a red card, green card protocol. Other people have different versions of this, but whereby we teach kids to wait in the absence of self-stimulatory behaviour, literally on a red card. Later on, we start with the card being so big and obvious so that it's a very clear indication that this is a period of time for work and for waiting, taking instruction, and then we turn the card to green, and that means go nuts, have fun, relax, stim, do all the stuff that you enjoy doing. So that's where we started with him. We taught him initially to wait for, literally half a second, and eventually, up to 45 seconds, or I'm sure he could wait a lot longer. But in the presence of that card, he knows not to engage in self-stimulatory behaviour. And obviously teaching him to fold his hands competed with him picking up things and throwing them. So, that's where we started, is these early learning to learn skills so that he was accessible to us.
Okay, but how did that go? Like, what did you start with? Like 30 seconds?
Literally in that protocol, yeah. I would not be surprised if I've done 1 million red card trials in my time. I would not be surprised, because I do work with a lot of kids on the spectrum that have high rates of self-stimulatory behaviour. And so literally in those early sessions, we do a lot of practice. Okay, put yourself on red, which is like turning your card to red. Show me red strong sitting. I must say that, thousands of times a week, and wait. And yeah, and we just shape up this ability to wait in the presence of a red card. Yeah.
So do they just get access to reinforcement when it's in the red card?
When they go green. So whatever you're asking them to do on red card, it's different for every client, because, we work with typical developing population as well. And even with kids not on the spectrum, we will use that type of protocol, because it signals things like you can't talk about, off limits, conversational things right now. On green, you can talk to me about anything, but on red, we just need to talk about work right now. So red just means work, green means play. And yeah, with him, we started just tiny wait intervals, and we built up over time on a very thick schedule of reinforcement. And then, once we had him waiting for about 20 or 30 seconds, we knew we would have the ability to do 20 or 30 seconds of work. So we started to introduce some very, very simple skills back then. He did have words, not a lot of functional language, but he did have words. So we were able to work on, repeating words after us, following instructions. We work to fluency, so we have timed intervals where we're asking, for certain instructions to be completed. And slowly over, weeks and months, we were able to build up the number of demands we put on him and access him, initially with candies, lollies, but because the iPad he would consistently throw.
Which is surprising to me because you'd think he gets access to maps and buildings. Why would he throw that?
Well, it was the only thing that he liked. And so you can imagine in other environments, he was getting it for free. So, right. He was like, I'm not going to work for it here if I get it free. Okay. So, we had to, and it's hard because you can't say to other environments, sorry, you can ask and say, can you please reduce the amount of screen time? But when a kid can't do much, it's not fair to take it away. So that's where we had to really find something that was competing with just access to Google Maps. Okay. I accidentally showed him my Google Calendar one day, and that was a really big motivator to him because he could work out which therapist he was going to be with at what time.
Oh, smarty.
And while that later we had to kind of fade that out, in the early days that became really interesting to him because then he could work out where he wanted to know where everybody lived approximately, and how far that was on Google Maps, so we started to develop this skill set that was reinforcing to him.
Okay. So it sounds like there are several strategies that worked. What did not work, or what did you have to sort of well, it sounds like the Google Calendar was something that didn't sort of, eventually you had to fade out. But anything else?
Well, because, it became an obsession and then, it was quite interrupted to instruction because it was like, oh, who's with me on Thursday and who's with me next week? So that's where we started to build, teach him Minecraft and building things and then copying models off YouTube, etc. over time. So that was, at the end of the day, motivators was everything because that allowed us to access him and enjoy things that he enjoyed. Whereas, when he first started working with me, he didn't have anything. And also we're terrified of getting hurt, so you you look calm on the outside, but, on the inside you're sort of highly aroused, waiting to respond to the next potential thing that's going to hit your head. Or his favourite thing actually was shin kicking, which meant we had to work at a distance from him, which is tricky when you're trying to access, fine motor skills and stuff. But we had to have 2 tables between us because he would kick really, really hard into shins. And sorry, I went off track a little bit there. You were saying, so what didn't work? Well, what didn't work was, in the early days in my assessment, I thought that some of this behaviour was maintained by escape from the task. Mm-hmm. And so we used something that a behaviour analyst would call escape extinction. And there was an initial improvement in behaviour in the first 4 days, and then it got considerably worse. And, I re-looked at my interventions and was like, wow, this is attention-maintained behaviour. And just because sometimes it's in the presence of an instruction, like demands being placed on him, when we used an intervention to address the attention, we got really, really good long-term improvement in the behaviour. So I think that's one thing that didn't work. The data told me it didn't work, and so we made a quick change. The other thing that really didn't work and had every single person had used with him prior to coming with us, and I worked it out very early on in our intervention, was telling him the rules under which he could get breaks and rewards, because he loved avoiding the rules. So he would be like, they would say to him, okay, Sam, if you do this, this and this, you can have your iPad. And he was like, great, then I'm going to do the complete opposite to that. What sometimes we would refer to as a counter control kid. If you say black, I will say white. And if you say I'm going to get my my iPad under these conditions, then I'm going to do all of those things that prevent me accessing it, because he loved the attention of it. And so we had to put in place invisible reinforcement mechanisms, so he didn't know when the reinforcer was coming, and it just really threw him. Because I remember him saying one day when he didn't actually have that much language, he said, because we have a points clicker, like a golf counter that we, keep points on for the kids. And he was like, he looked at me and he went, sometimes 50, sometimes 100. And I'm like, this kid is a genius, because he had worked out his variable, what we call a variable ratio of reinforcement. In other words, we had this little calculator that we used, and every single time he was earning points on a different number of points to cash in, so he couldn't predict when the reinforcer was coming. But he kept looking at this clicker going, I can't work out when she's going to cash in. And so that's something that had not ever worked, because immediately they used to give him things like 5 stars where he was before, or, something that he knew when it was coming. And he found that much more reinforcing than the actual thing that he was getting, talking about the behaviour plan, because he loved attention. Right. And then talking about what happened afterwards, he loved that too. He'd say, Sam didn't get iPad, and then he would laugh hysterically because he thought, he was so much cleverer than people that were implementing these, reinforcement protocols. So even to this day, we have an invisible reinforcement mechanism he doesn't know. But what has become really reinforcing to him is communicating to the people that pick him up that he had a strong session. And so, once upon a time, it was more reinforcing to talk about when he had a bad session, and now he will hold himself together through thick and thin to get that attention and talking about having a strong session. So,
okay.
So, yeah, that's there.
So
that's some of the things that didn't work.
What were the early teaching goals that you had in mind? Because, obviously now you've got him to somewhat engage. What comes next? We were challenged, I guess, with him, and he was at school part of the day and then came to us. So school were supposedly responsible for his academic instruction. But one of the things this little boy was completely missing, even though he had sort of sight word reading, was any reading comprehension. So he was really stuck in looking at YouTube but not being able to read anything. And he was really interested in things like, places of things and, information about building roads, for instance. So, we really wanted to open up his reading comprehension. So we started to work on, very small component skills of reading, sounding out words, and then reading words, and then starting to begin. But I guess what came before that was to address his high rates of eye stim, because I think he had been, I was working with his pediatrician as well, because it was kind of like an eye tick. His eyes would constantly flick up to any light or movement. Like, I remember taking data on it. It was like 100 times an hour. His eyes would flick to light, or if light came in through a door or someone walked past and it created a shadow, his eyes were I've just never seen anything like the rate of this eye movement. So we had to teach what we call a signal, which is getting his eyes under instructional control. So, we use a pen. It comes in direct instruction, uses signals for anyone that's familiar with direct instruction. But so it's just, it's something that we could direct his eyes with. So we did a lot of practice at directing his eyes to us and directing his eyes to the material, directing his eyes to, anything that we needed his attention to be focused towards. And we worked just like we worked on the waiting, building intervals of waiting until he could work for 45 seconds. We built his ability to respond to a signal for longer periods of time so we could direct his attention. And then, we set goals for him to keep his eyes tracking materials, because he would look up from the materials and then go back down and make mistakes. And if he made mistakes, he didn't like that. So improving his eye ticks made the most dramatic improvement in his aggression, because he wasn't being corrected, so he wasn't getting negative attention from, having to repeat tasks. So, yeah, there was a combination of things going on there, but using those signals to direct his eyes made a huge difference to him. And then we were able to start target, reading instruction and language instruction, and, having him be able to, converse with us through basic language. So, yeah, that were the very early learning goals for him. He had a real skill set in math, so we did program for math as well, because it was particularly easy for him. Even though he didn't know that much, he just got it so quickly. Skip counting and, identifying numbers he really liked it as well. So we interspersed, those in amongst his program too. This episode of the ABN OT podcast is brought to you by Fit Learning Chicago, London and Perth, Australia. For more than 2 decades, Fit Learning has been combining the best of behaviour, cognitive and neuroscience to create one highly effective teaching methodology to transform children's cognitive and academic skills to create cognitively fit learners. They rapidly accelerate children's memory, attention, concentration and agility such that they can learn new skills effortlessly at school and beyond. They are known for reducing 1 to 2 years' growth in as little as 40 hours. A FIT comprehensive skills assessment can determine areas for growth that will transform a child's learning.
see www.fitlearners.com and www.fitlearning.com.au to learn more about their program.
Okay, so this is all sort of pre-collaboration with an OT, right? I'm assuming she started with just observing some of your sessions.
That's
How did you actually start the collaboration?
Yeah. So when, I was pretty protective of this kid. I was working with the school as well. Fortunately, there is behaviour analyst at his school, which is pretty rare in our state. So I was able to collaborate with the school, but then I didn't want anybody else touching, literally working with him that didn't understand that his behaviour was maintained by attention, a lot of it anyway, and also how to address this self-stimulatory behaviour, because obviously you need his eyes to be directed to materials when you're working on things like hand strengthening and also shoe tying. Yeah, so when Mum said, I really want him to access some OT now, which I understood because he had virtually no self-care skills. He couldn't button his own clothing or feed himself, and she'd become very used to helping with those things. So when she suggested that, I said, will you work with someone that I can collaborate with? Can I find someone that will work with me and come to sessions here in our clinic where we have good history and good instructional control, and there's things he loves here. So we just set aside one session a week where the OT would come. She observed for about 4 weeks, and I, sat down and went through her behaviour plan. And then I simplified the behaviour plan for her because the rate of demand was going to be lower in her session. And she observed me. We used something that behaviour analysts will be familiar with, behavioural skills training, where I explained it to her. She practiced it with me. I gave her feedback. She observed me doing it with him, and then she did it with feedback after that. So the good thing is we found some things that he really liked doing with her, and in particular, she did her full assessment, and we found together that his core strength was really poor, and he wasn't holding himself up in the chair well or reaching for materials well. So he loved doing that. What do you call that, Aditi? Those supine position, and what's the other one? So the Superman and the meatball is what she would call it.
Yeah.
So they really bonded through that because he thought it was super silly. So they would get down on the floor together and do these practice together, which I would do as well because it's so good for your stomach muscles. So we found a way in, and they connected through that. And it wasn't too long, actually, before he was saying OT is my favourite part of the week.
Surprise, surprise.
So it was that really observation, feedback, simplifying the behaviour plan, because we had about 5 different schedules of reinforcement, and there's just absolutely no way. It was, we're just fluent at that. We do it all day, every day. There's no way that she was able to use the full behaviour plan, but we did a simplified version of it, and we had this cheat sheet that we created to remind her, and it worked really, really well.
So does she understand the whole light switch and on and off? Did she start using that in her session with him?
Yeah, she did. And, I think, she's not here to defend herself, but right. At least in my observation, and it's very frequently common, is that a lot of people will do the opposite to that. In other words, the child is engaging in problem behaviour, and then a lot of things occur after the problem behaviour. Whereas when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, the things are just as normal. So, I had to show her, okay, now's the time to go nuts, or have a party, right? He just followed your rule, and he made, he gave you eye contact, and he smiled at you. Party time. Right. And so she was good at having a party. She's kind of, or providing attention. She's doing it at the wrong time. That's all.
Yeah. I dare say OTs are good at that, at having a party. We are very good at that.
Well, not just OT. Oh, OTs are good at having parties, yeah. Yes. Great at having parties. You guys have lots of fun stuff to play with, Who
right.
doesn't want to hang out in an OT box of stuff? All those squeezy things with the eyes squishing out of them, and, you have some cool things. So, yeah, she knew about the party, but teaching her about that, light switch on, so when he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, I give this discrimination to parents as well. The light should shine on him, your full face, all of the attention, because he loves attention, your best version of yourself, right? Showered in light and all good things. And when he wasn't doing what he's supposed to be doing, a low voice tone, turning away from him because his aggression is gone now, turning away from him and, providing minimal attention until he was starting to engage in work again. So that light switch on, the light shines on him when he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and then reducing attention when he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. So there was some instruction in that. It was just not, what she was familiar with.
What other OT goals did you work on? It was basically you helped her with her assessment, but then did you guys identify some specific goals?
Yeah, this was the really exciting part, I think, is that she was totally up for collaborating on being creative about fine motor skills. She did her assessment, and I really loved what I learned through the process of that assessment. Because I don't think I've ever, maybe other than for my own daughter, which is a long time ago now, hadn't been sat in on a full OT assessment. So, she gave me some good ideas, but then I was like, what if we do it like this, this, and this? Because in the precision teaching field, there is something called the Big Six, or now it's the Big 6+6, or some people have the Big 8+6. But anyway, it's a big set of skills that I had been teaching him anyway, which is for crossing the midline and reaching for materials, very early hand manipulation skills. And for anyone that's interested in that in the IT world, there is literature. I'll put that in our notes. There is research that's been published on the Big Six. So I was like, this is what I've been doing, and what are some things that you would like to incorporate? And so we got really creative together and developed these sort of, I guess, SAM-friendly fine motor skills to specifically address the issues that we're having. And what we were trying to get to at the end of the day, other than handwriting, was shoe tying. So I do want to present a specific case study on that, because it's like in terms of rewarding experiences I've had, that was right up there, because literally the first time I ever put shoes down in front of him, this is before the OT was involved, he threw that shoe at my head and pretty hard. So I was like, I'm determined that we will get better at this, because he literally could not even, I know everybody teaches shoe tying differently, but I always get kids to grasp the ties at the base of, at the shoe right where they are, and then pull them up. Mm-hmm. But he literally could not even hold on to those ties. That's how weak his pincer grip was. So we got creative in finding ways, and a lot of it involved these accommodations that OTs do, but we used lollies, which was super awesome. So, like getting him to have a fun, like holding a lolly in his 3 fingers so that he would, make a pincer grip with both hands for grabbing the shoes. And then if he had, personal bests on his shoe tying, he was allowed to eat those lollies or put them in a cup and have them later. And then in his handwriting, one of the component skills we were doing was what we call racetracks, making sideways 8s to get that pivots, we call them, right. Pivoting the up and down movement of the pincer grip. And so he would rest he loved this. We would squash a jelly bean together. Jelly beans is one of his favourite candies. And then we would squash it together to make it flat, and then he would rest it on the pad of his hand. And that's another thing, is he was really reinforced by the names of the parts of the hand. So Maya was able to tell me about the web, So, we taught him the parts of the hand so that he was very aware of which part of the hand he had to use for each of those skills. But anyway, candies were just a really great reinforcer for him, and there was lots of ways we could incorporate that into his fine motor strengthening. So we did a combination of her fine motor strengthening goals. We used her core strengthening goals, and then we brought in the Big Six as well, because we were working with him 5 days a week. She had his 1 session a week. So we would do all of these Big Six skills during the week, and then, she would use her fine motor strengthening on that 1 day a week. So it's a really great collaboration. And I just remember Sam saying to me, when are you going to become an OT, Mandy? So I was becoming kind of by spending so much time with the OT, was starting to incorporate more OT goals, and
so I think that's sort of where I come in. You had you and I had talked, and we sort of consulted and started discussing fine motor aspects and all that, which actually leads me into our next episode. That's exactly what we're going to talk about in our next episode.
Exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
This is when I really started to love OT, is when, I learned more about hand strength and, those things that were really getting in the way of teaching effectively.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the contentious issues that OTs sort of have is how can, ABAs work on this? This is more our domain. Well, we're here to share the information and so we can help more clients. That's our goal. So the next episode, we're going to discover how ABA and OT collaborated on Sam's case on assessing fine motor skills and give you an introduction to the type of OT assessments we talked about and used. Also, engage on a collaborative dialogue on how to develop effective intercollaborative interventions for Sam, which Mandy already sort of alluded to. So, yeah, next episode should be brilliant.
Exciting. So, key takeaway from today, from my perspective, is the importance of assessing why a child is doing what they're doing and ensuring that the intervention is designed so that they're accessing the thing they want when they're not engaging in the problem behaviour and not accessing it when they are. And obviously, behaviour analysts take data on that so they can make sure that their intervention is working. And I think the other key takeaway is thinking about addressing behaviour using a light switch on and light switch off protocol. This works well with parents if this is something that you want to hand on to the parents that you're working with, because generally you'll find parents do the exact opposite of that. I can say that because I'm both a parent and a therapist. So I had to learn that skill over the last 16 years. But you will find very frequently that is the opposite. So the light switch on, light switch off protocol, that's the key takeaway from today. And we have a copy of it in our
resources and our show notes. It will be there too. And it will probably be accessible in our Facebook group too.
Great. Thank you for that.
Okay, well, thank you all for listening today. I hope some of you, or a lot of you, have registered for our upcoming deeper dive on sleep issues and the bedtime past. I'm so looking forward to this. I really want to share the evidence-based strategy that's so easy to implement to solve child's sleep issues once and for all. Thank goodness. It's on 27th of January at 7 p.m. Please find the link in the show notes, or of course contact us on Facebook or our email. So remember, the most valuable resource we have as therapists is each other. Without collaboration, our growth is limited to our own perspectives. So #collaboration over competition. Until next time, bye-bye from the Windy City.
And hooroo from down under.